Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, July the 6th, 2021. I hope all of my American friends had a lovely 4th of July long weekend, and I'm going to start with that today. You all know the story of the lobster in the pot, where the temperature is turned up very slowly, so the lobster doesn't realize that it's being boiled. Well, I suppose we can look at our Western countries, all of them, as lobsters in a pot. But the difficulty is that our enemies have decided to break out into a victory dance before they have actually won. From the New York Times. Today, flying the American flag from the back of a pickup truck or over a lawn is increasingly seen as a clue, albeit an imperfect one, to a person's political affiliation in a deeply divided nation. Ah, I see. So the progressives have decided that they hate the stars and stripes. That is really not a good look. You know, back in 1972, George McGovern's Democratic Party was lambasted as the party of acid, amnesty, and abortion. And it took them a long time to recover from that, to be seen as patriotic Americans. But now that they've decided that the culture war is over and that they have won and they're going to, shoot all the wounded, they just, again, break out into a victory dance. The story in the New York Times is by a woman called Sarah Maslin Nur, and she interviews a bunch of people who tell her, well, not all of them, who tell her that, no, I'm not going to fly the flag because then I might be seen as a Trump supporter, and you wouldn't want that. The sentiment of some conservatives is that a line was drawn when Colin Kaepernick, the former National Football League quarterback, set off a national movement protesting the shootings of black men by police by taking a knee during the anthem in 2016. His kneeling protest, as Kaepernick has said, still demonstrated respect for the flag, but others saw him hijacking the flag for political purposes. Mary Neely Rodriguez, 33, said she believed that Trump's most fervent supporters had done the same. Rodriguez, who was visiting Greenport with her fiancé during the 4th of July weekend, said that she once regularly flew the flag at her home in Freeport, about 80 miles west on Long Island, taking it down only in winter for safekeeping. But about 3 years ago, when spring came, Rodriguez, who is black and a Democrat, left the flag in storage. It hasn't come out since. It didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore, she said. Yes, again, definitely not a good look. If we examine the media over this 4th of July weekend, you see that the elite has decided that it's safe to say that they hate their own country, the United States of America. Let's see. Maxine Waters tweeted on the 4th. July 4th, and so the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Equal to what? What men? Only white men? Isn't it something that they wrote this in 1776 when African Americans were enslaved? They weren't thinking about us then, but we're thinking about us now. Further, the Declaration of Independence say we hold these truths to be self-evident, yet 17 states have enacted voter suppression laws. Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice. Need I say more? Hashtag July the 4th. I guess Maxine Waters doesn't know very much about history, particularly the fact that slavery was not particular to the United States, that slavery is a universal institution that held sway all over the world. And let's look at her list of heroes there. Michael Brown is there. Michael Brown, the gentle giant, what he was, 6'4", 292 pounds, who stole a box of cigars from a grocery store and then strong-armed the Asian owner and proceeded with his accomplice to walk down the middle of the street after having committed a robbery when a police car arrived His accomplice, smarter than the gentle giant, decided to head for the hills, but Michael continued walking down the middle of the street, holding his stolen box of cigars. When he was stopped by the police officer, Michael Brown leaned into the window, punched the officer in the head, then attempted to steal his gun. The police officer recovered, got out of the car, and ordered him to stop. Michael Brown instead turned around and attempted to bum rush the policeman, whereupon it took something like 8 shots to bring him down. The case of Michael Brown was investigated intensively by both local and federal officials, and who decided that despite all the lies that were told on behalf of Michael Brown, that his death was thoroughly justified. I can't imagine why Maxine Waters would drag this dead man out as some sort of hero, unless, of course, the joke is that, well, because we can. We can take a very bad man and make him a hero, retrospectively. Here's someone called Toure writing in the Griot on July the 3rd, F the 4th of July. In a world where we officially recognize Juneteenth, that great new holiday sits on the calendar, casting a long shadow over Independence Day, making it look like a hypocrite and a damn fool. Yes, nice personification there, Toure. Independence for who? It wasn't independence for Black people, for our ancestors. So why would we celebrate the 4th of July? And it isn't merely that Americans owned slaves at the time that America became independent. It's that slavery was completely wrapped up in the movement to become independent. Nicole Hannah-Jones's essay from the 1619 Project, blah, 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 etc. One wonders with people like Toure why they don't display any anger at their Black fellow men in Africa who sold them to the Europeans for brandy and trinkets. This is from Penny Starr at Breitbart. NPR celebrates Independence Day by portraying Declaration of Independence as racist. The left-wing media outlet said it started the tradition as a way of marking Independence Day, that is to say, reading the Declaration of Independence, framing its report to point out the flaws and racist elements of one of the most cherished U.S. documents. But after last summer's protests and our national, wait for it, reckoning on race, the words in the document land differently. It famously declares that all men are created equal, even though women, enslaved people, and indigenous Americans were not held as equal at the time. Neither were they held equal in any other country on earth. What then follows is a long list of grievances and charges against King George III that outlined the 13 North American British colonies' intentions to separate from Great Britain. The list, originally written largely by Thomas Jefferson, was edited by the Continental Congress. Among the Congress's charges, it deleted a reference to Scotch and foreign mercenaries. It turns out there were a member of Congress who were of Scottish descent. To win support from Southerners, the Congress removed criticism of the African slave trade. But a racist slur about Native Americans stayed in. Yes, the Founding Fathers were the real racists. NPR included remarks from author David Truer, who is an Ojibwe from Leech Lake Reservation. Quote, but a deeper look at history also shows that one of the reasons why the colonists wanted to rise up against the British and wage the Revolutionary War was over the question of who would try to colonize native lands west of the colonies. The Crown wanted that money for themselves. The colonists, understandably, would have preferred to have it for themselves. So the whole revolution was in large part fought over who got to take our stuff. NPR, which regularly maligns the United States in its reporting, concluded by criticizing the founding document and laid out that its foundation is not for the most free and prosperous country in the world, but what for America could be. The Declaration is a document with flaws and deeply ingrained hypocrisies, NPR concluded. It also laid the foundation for our collective aspirations, our hopes for what America could be. So in that spirit, here again is the Declaration of Independence as read by NPR staff. Again, from Breitbart, this is Robert Kraychik. Leftists want Americans to hate their own country ahead of Independence Day. J.D. Vance, author of Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and a culture in crisis, and Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate from Ohio, said on Friday's edition of SiriusXM's Breitbart News Daily. Democrats and the broader left frame the United States as a nation born in sin in need of political salvation through leftist ideology, Vance observed. What I really hate about what the left is doing right now is that they're trying to make us hate our history. He determined that left-wing historical revisionism is not done in good faith to learn lessons from our history. A unifying, affectionate view of national history facilitates social cohesion and healthy functioning, Vance held. Well, apparently, Vance is under the illusion that the left actually treasures a social cohesion and healthy functioning, whereas, of course, it's the exact opposite. Unless you have that real deep sense of patriotism that makes you feel like you're connected to the traditions of the past, inspired to make your country better for the future, then you can't actually accomplish anything. You're not a real country if you don't have a sense of your history, said Vance. On this 4th of July, especially given what's going on politically, we should say we're proud to be Americans. We take pride in our traditions, and we're looking to build something better for the future. Because if we don't, then what's the point of this whole American project? And someone called Cori Bush decided to join the conversation. Independence Day is about freedom for whites, while blacks still aren't free, Representative Cori Bush, Democrat of Missouri, said on July the 4th. Blacks still aren't free. This is not a very, self-reflective woman. She hasn't considered the question of why, if blacks aren't free in America, then a black woman, especially one as stupid as her, is somehow a member of the House of Representatives. This land is stolen land, and black people still aren't free, she tweeted. Bush's congressional campaign in 2020 aligned itself with the Black Lives Matter apparatus. She became the first black congresswoman from Missouri. She has regularly framed politics in racial terms, using phrases such as white supremacy, systemic racism, black liberation, and racial justice, and structural inequity. She called for unspecified reparations in pursuit of equity. According to Bush, opposition to the neo-Marxist paradigm of critical race theory is a racist dog whistle. In May, she used the leftist neologism birthing people while alleging that doctors don't care about the pain of blacks. She tweeted, "Every day, black birthing people and our babies die because our doctors don't believe our pain. My children almost became a statistic. I almost became a statistic. I testified about my experience today. Hear us, believe us, because for so long, nobody has." And reading about Cori Bush on Wikipedia, I find out that in 2011, she established the Kingdom Embassy International Church in St. Louis, Missouri. The Washington Free Beacon has reported while she was a pastor at the church, Bush performed faith healings. She described the article as a misrepresentation to the Kansas City Star. Her interest in politics began after the 2014 Ferguson unrest, or riots as other people would call it, during which she worked as a triage nurse and organizer. She said she was assaulted by police and she was hit by an officer, but was not arrested. So apparently there has been a backlash against the New York Times article, which I spoke of recently. Jack Posobiec tweeted, "Prayers up for all the New York Times reporters who have to endure this weekend full of American flags." You see, a similar thing has happened in England, where the St. George's flag is not allowed, hardly, to be shown, even, because apparently it is a symbol of white supremacy, racism, whatever. Mike Hahn tweeted the New York Times, seemingly admitting that the GOP is the party of the American flag. Joe Borelli tweeted, "Flying your flag is offensive, you guys." Ryan Saavedra tweeted, "Only scum have a problem with the American flag." From Jerry Dunleavy, "The American flag belongs to all Americans of goodwill. Don't let your politics blind you. Celebrate America. Enjoy the 4th. and let's keep this great experiment going. I don't like that term, experiment, as Eric von Kuhn-Ledin once said. So what if the experiment fails? Are they going to call off America? Logan Hall tweeted, New York Times seized at the thought of pickup trucks flying the flag. Well, progressives get this kind of delicious thrill when they think of pickup trucks, because pickup trucks are driven by rednecks, the kind of people who wear truckers' caps. And, maybe they're going to beat you up because they recognize what you are. Of course, that never happens, but it doesn't make any difference. And the Washington Post weighs in. The Statue of Liberty is a symbol of hypocrisy or unfulfilled promises, the Washington Post's Philip Kennicott said in an essay published Saturday. In his piece titled, Maybe It's Time to Admit That the Statue of Liberty Has Never Quite Measured Up, the art and architecture critic wrote, try looking for Lady Liberty at an exhibition of Chicano graphic art at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, for example, where familiar images, flags, maps, military recruiting posters are repurposed. You will find the statue almost or entirely absent. Maybe that's because, compared with other icons of national identity, it is ambiguous and ambivalent. As familiar to some Americans as the flag, the statue is just as meaningless or foreign to others, a sign without significance, or worse, a symbol of hypocrisy or unfulfilled promises. It's a terrible thing to hate one's country. According to the National Park Service, the Statue of Liberty enlightening the world was a gift from the French people to the United States and is recognized as a universal symbol of freedom and democracy. It was dedicated October 28, 1886, and designated as a national monument in 1924. However, Kennicott claimed, indeed, if the statue has any kind of stable meaning over its lifetime, it is not as a symbol of liberty, but as a symbol of the misuse of liberty, as a hollow promise, unequally distributed, and limited in its application to certain groups. Some Twitter users criticized Kennicott, one person writing, goodness me, Philip, to echo Bill Maher, the Statue of Liberty isn't a Republican, it's a statue. There must be better things to write about it. Meanwhile, the New York Times is facing backlash for politicizing the American flag by suggesting that flying the American flag from the back of a pickup truck or over a lawn is increasingly seen as a clue to a person's political motivation. And finally, we have this from Joshua Klein. An essay published in The Nation on Friday accuses Americans celebrating independence of failing to reckon with the fact that the founders of our nation were colonizers. I think most people know that. With American exceptionalism and foreign policy being grounded in racism, adding that issues such as climate change and racist policing are the greatest existential threats, while global terrorism and threats from China, Russia, and Iran are merely imagined threats. The essay, penned by the Center for International Policy's president and CEO Salih Booker, as well as board member Diana Olbaum, carries the title The Willful Self-Delusion of American Independence Day, and claims that despite endeavoring to do so, the U.S. has rarely lived up to ideals. Enough is enough, the essay asserts. Oh, enough is enough, So two pissy writers for The Nation have decided, well, what are you going to do about it? The piece begins by accusing American citizens celebrating Independence Day of failing to reckon with the fact that the founders of our nation were colonizers, and adding that since declaring independence, the U.S. has only expanded the scope of its imperial domination. The essay continues by claiming that while racial biases are being addressed domestically, the structural racism inherent in U.S. foreign policy has yet to be seriously probed. While systemic white supremacy and the state's use of violence against people of color in this country is at the forefront of the national debate, the structural racism of U.S. foreign policy has escaped serious scrutiny. It is precisely through its brutal history of genocide and slavery that the U.S. government learned to use violence and military force to make white people secure in their positions of privilege and domination at home and abroad. Oh, so did the United States, squandering trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan, somehow made Americans more secure in their homeland, especially when, of course, just as after the foolish adventure in Somalia, the United States decides to bring the people that they've invaded home. We're going to bomb your countries, but we're going to invite the survivors to our country and hope that they don't hold a grudge. Seems rather foolish to me. This is from Walter Todd Houston. Just ahead of Independence Day, Marvel Comics featured a new Captain America issue in which the Captain slams the American dream as a false promise. The first issue of the new series, The United States of Captain America, by writer Christopher Cantwell, was published on June 30th, only 4 days before the country traditionally celebrates its Day of Independence from Great Britain. As the issue begins, Steve Rogers, the original Cap, grouses about how America is built on lies. "I'm loyal to nothing except the dream," Rogers says. Here's the thing about a dream, though. A dream isn't real. I'm starting to think America actually has two dreams and one lie. The first American dream is the one that isn't real. It's one some people expect to be just handed to them, and they get angry when it disappears, when the truth is it never really existed in the first place. He adds that the dream with the white picket fences, golly, what are we in the 1950s, is a lie that doesn't get along nicely with reality, other cultures, immigrants, the poor. Rogers goes on to take a swipe at those who favor tough immigration laws, saying, "We're at our best when we keep no one out. A good dream is shared radically, shared with everyone. When something isn't shared, it can become the American lie." The series features the Captain and his superhero pal Sam Wilson, who is portrayed by Anthony Mackie in the live-action Marvel movies, going on a quest to chase down the thief who stole the Captain's original red, white, and blue shield. And during the crime-busting adventure, the pair crisscrosses America, meeting a new Captain. America figures from different regions of the country, including a gay captain, a Native American captain, and a black woman who claims her own version of the character, replete with her own shield. Is it just a money laundering operation now? Do they really expect people, adults, to spend money to be insulted? Oh, yes, this is gay, and this is gay, and this is gay, and this is trans, and this is non-binary, and America is horrible, of course. That is not a good business model. Flash forward today, and only a few months ago, Captain American writer Tennessee Coates pushed out an issue that cast conservative philosopher and writer Jordan Peterson's ideas as on a par with the hateful ideas of the series' Nazi villain, the Red Skull. Tangentially, in a recent highly woke Disney Marvel streaming TV series, The Falcon and Winter Soldier, as he takes on the mantle of Captain America, Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson delivers a monologue in which he portrays America as an oppressive place that needs change. And, here we have some good news. This is from David Eng. HBO's woke-pandering Lovecraft Country canceled after one season, smeared police America as racist. The genre-bending Lovecraft Country was the darling of corporate media for the way it portrayed the United States as a racist country swarming with white supremacists. It also vilified law enforcement by depicting police officers as members of a bizarre murderous cult. The show, based on the novel of the same name, combined horror and science fiction to explore the Jim Crow era, while sometimes anachronistically alluding to current events like the death of Eric Garner. HBO did not say why it canceled the series. We will not be moving forward with a second season of Lovecraft Country, the premium cable channel said in a statement to Deadline. We are grateful for the dedication and artistry of the gifted cast and crew, and to Misha Green, who crafted this groundbreaking series, and to the fans. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Following the cancellation, show creator Misha Green tweeted her idea for the second season, which would have been called Supremacy. The second season would have depicted the U.S. divided into 4 separate territories, including one called the New Negro Republic and another called the White Lands. And I'm looking at a map here in which approximately half of the United States is given to Native Indians. Lovecraft Country demonized police officers in its fourth episode by portraying cops as members of a bloodthirsty cult known as the Sons of Adam, according to multiple reports. Other episodes depicted cops engaging in casual acts of sadism and brutality. The show anachronistically alluded to the Eric Garner case by showing white cops choking a black female character who says, "I can't breathe." According to a report from Newsbusters, Lovecraft actress Journey Smollett tweeted out the words when the episode first aired in October. And Journey, of course, is spelled Jurnee. Smollett, sister to disgraced hate hoaxer Jussie Smollett, proudly declared that the series' theme centered on racism. "Our heroes essentially are going on a quest to bring down white supremacy," she said during a Television Critics Association panel. "We are still on that quest today in 2020 as Black Americans. Racism is such a demonic spirit. It's something we are fighting off, a demonic spirit." Yes, white people are literally witches. Lovecraft Country was co-executive produced by J.J. Abrams and Jordan Peele. Last year, Abrams' studio Bad Robot issued an internal employee guide to dismantling white supremacy at work, in which it encouraged employees to create an anti-racist work environment. The guide told managers that they need to acknowledge systemic racism and state-sanctioned violence against Black people. It also told managers to give Black employees time off, no questions asked. And finally, yes, intersectionality. Don't you just love it? ESPN has removed reporter Rachel Nichols from its coverage of the NBA Finals Tuesday after a recording of her phone conversation criticizing the network's diversity policies broke over the weekend. "We believe this is the best decision for all concerned in order to keep the focus on the NBA Finals," ESPN said in its Tuesday statement. Until today, Nichols, who is white, had been giving sideline reports as part of ESPN's basketball coverage with hosts Mike Breen, Jeff Van Gundy, and Mark Jackson. While she is no longer assigned to that role, ESPN also noted that Nichols will not be removed as host of The Jump during the series. The reprisal comes on the heels of an article published by the New York Times Sunday, in which it was reported that Nichols could be heard on a recorded phone call complaining that ESPN had given one of her contractually arranged on-air jobs to Black reporter Maria Taylor. In the conversation, Nichols says on one hand that she wishes Maria Taylor all the best, but on the other hand, does not want to lose the things she worked hard to earn just because ESPN is feeling pressure over making its on-air staff more diverse. Quote, "If you need to give her more things to do because you are feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity, which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it, like, go for it. Just find it somewhere else. You are not going to find it from me or taking my thing away," unquote. On Monday, a day after the story of the recording broke, Nichols went on the air to offer an apology for her comments. "I also don't want to let this moment pass without saying how much I respect and how much I value our colleagues here at ESPN, how deeply, deeply sorry I am for disappointing those I hurt, particularly Maria Taylor," Nichols told the audience during a broadcast of NBA Countdown. Yes, another ritual, groveling apology after America's Stasi, the New York Times, outs someone. The recording also brought wide criticism from Adam Mendelsohn, a close advisor to Lakers star LeBron James, who was the person on the other end of the recorded phone conversation with Nichols. NBA stars have close advisors now? Take a look at the chat. Oh, hello to Star Rover, Turkey Hoop, Hakasu88, Dan, Anrun. Chogokin666 says, "I committed a nano aggression today. Nobody noticed, but I feel really bad about it." Weird Yankee said, "Did you buy beer for the weekend?" Yes, a little. Leponius Maximus Meridia says, "Greetings." Let's see. Has the heat wave in Victoria broken yet? Yes. What's the temperature now? It's about 71 degrees. And Chokin666, Black folks think they are from 40 to 55% of the population, and eventually an adult will be in charge. Oscar Toe says, libs keep lying and winning. Is there a lesson to be learned here? Well, I guess the lesson to be learned is that it's better to ask for what you want rather than to pretend that you're disinterested. Oh, Don Will says, I knew, as I predicted, no show Monday. You must admit, KMG, I am the approaching accuracy not seen since the amazing Kreskin graced the boob tube. The amazing Creston, George Joseph Kresge, a Montclair, New Jersey born mentalist, is 86 years old, said Don Willis. I seem to recall him being on Canadian television a lot in the 1970s. Don Willis, this land is your land, this land is my land. Wait, this is not my land anymore. It belongs to the alphabet people and is ruled by the minority with darker skin. Oops, pardon me. Clownveld says, thank you for Peter Kemp, whose first two memoirs I have now bought. They are outstanding. I think myself fortunate to have found your remarkable, impeccably mannered broadcast. Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Okay, Mary Crow says, if this keeps up, the American flag will be seen as the Confederate flag is today. Well, that has been predicted. You know, how long will the Jefferson Memorial remain in Washington, D.C., or the Washington Monument? Okay, and clean your room, Red Skull. That's from Dan. In an alternate universe, Red Skull is reading a comic book where his own words are spoken by a Canadian professor. Glanville says the vestigial institutions of civilization are defended in the imagination by the prohibition of personal experience and the valorization of fantasy. Speaking of HBO, did you see the season 3 promo for Succession? Someone sent me a link to it. I generally don't like to watch these because they give away too many plot points. I like to go in fresh, as Frank Costanza once said. Popcasso 88 says, nothing says quality product like J.J. Abrams. Half Galician says, Nichols is only there because she's a woman, so what's good for the goose, etc. Well, no, I just sideline reporters. I mean, I remember when this was instituted, and okay, there's the coach, and he's, he's walking to the locker room at the end of the second quarter, and sideline reporter, typically a woman, asks something stupid like, so after 2 quarters, you're losing 24-3. So what are you going to have to do different in the second half? And I so much wanted one of these coaches to say, well, obviously, first we have to stop sucking. Let's see. Half Galician says these NBAers make so much money that they have what the equivalent is as asset allocators are. Mendelsohn is the business money man. Jeffrey Pye says, thanks for leading me to the Velvet's Live of the Matrix. Stunning performance. Oh, yeah. One of the things I did on the weekend was read attacks on myself. Where I have all these people attacking me as a Nazi, whereas I also have all these other people attacking me as a so-called Zionist shill. I must say it was rather bizarre. And, oh, yes, I've mentioned that in Canada, our national holiday, the generic Canada Day, has for years been a celebration of the immigrant, and it appears that same thing has happened to the 4th of July. This is from Neil Monroe. Immigrants built America, saved Americans from the coronavirus disease, and are responsible for landing NASA's latest spaceship on Mars. U.S. President Joe Biden told a group of new immigrants during their naturalization ceremony. Folks, it's dreams of immigrants like you that built America and continue to inject new energy, new vitality, a new strength. No, it was not immigrants that built America. It was colonists who built America. Biden said, we've seen that most clearly during this pandemic with immigrants as frontline workers and as scientists and researchers on the front lines of finding vaccines. Immigration has always been essential to America, he insisted. The casual insults of Americans and their children as inadequate are commonplace in the capital city of America's homeland, which is often described as a nation of immigrants by pro-migration businesses and political groups. In his speech, Biden also credited immigrants with helping to fulfill the high goals of the Declaration of Independence. Quote, We were founded on an idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. As I said, since our nation's founding, the quintessential idea in America has been nurtured and enriched and advanced by the contributions and sacrifices of so many people, almost all of whom were immigrants. Biden also claimed that immigrants were responsible for NASA's newest exploration mission to Mars. The team was made up of immigrants who told me they grew up looking at the stars. Literally, not a joke. I'm not making this up. That's what they told me in our conversation. Biden even thanked the migrants for moving into the United States. So I want to thank you all for choosing us, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you for choosing the United States of America, believing that America is worthy of your aspirations, worthy of your dreams. Alejandro Mayorkas, Biden's border chief, who also attended the same naturalization ceremony for 21 individuals. Immigration is what makes America great, says Mayorkas in a tweeted dismissal of 285 million Americans. Mayorkas is an immigration zealot and is himself an immigrant who arrived from Cuba at age 1. Yes, foreigners are better than us. Here's a story from the Daily Mail. Parents from a $57,000 a year all-girls Manhattan school attended by Gwyneth Paltrow reject apology from principal after students were shown video mocking white women. In a letter sent by a parent to Spence School Principal Bodie Brizendine, as well as its school board, the unidentified parent expressed disappointment at the school's response to the incident and took aim at its board, saying it was not doing enough to curtail the teacher's woke agenda. The letter was widely backed by other parents at the school, according to the New York Post. While I was upset after hearing what happened at Spence, the email from Bodie that followed really pushed me over the edge. Further, that the board has not weighed in on this matter gives the impression that the board shares the opinion that racism is indeed acceptable as long as it fits within the climate of the times. The posh $57,000 a year private school, which counts stars such as Gwyneth Paltrow and Kerry Washington among its alumni, found itself in hot water last month after a video of Ziwi Fumudo's Showtime show Ziwi was shown to students, in which she speaks to author Fran Lebowitz, telling her, "I believe that you are not concerned with how annoying white women can be." The incident sparked a fierce backlash from parents, with some, including Cuban-American Gabrielle Barron, complaining in a letter that the video was blatantly racist and said she was removing her daughter from the academy. In her apology email, Brizendine wrote, "We take this seriously. It is never acceptable to ridicule anyone at any time." This video is not part of the Spence curriculum. Our teacher and the school acknowledge that sharing a satirical video that made fun of white women was a significant mistake. We are sorry for any harm this has caused to anyone in our community. The anonymous parent, however, was not having it. Choosing to label the video as satirical and that it made fun of ridicules is a gross understatement, they wrote. That you fully trust the professionalism of your dedicated faculty and will be strengthening protocols is not an acceptable response. The clip in question was the season premiere of Fumudo's provocative HBO Showtime show, Ziwi. HBO described it as the riotously funny new variety series from writer-comedian and internet sensation Ziwi, a no-holds-barred mix of musical numbers, interviews, and sketches that challenges America's discomfort with race, politics, and other cultural issues. The episode sees her interview feminist icon Gloria Steinem and quote the explicit lyrics of Cardi B song WAP at her, asking, "Do you feel empowered?" And yes, this is again from the Daily Mail from Brian Stieglitz. A video posted to Instagram captures yet another brazen act of shoplifting in San Francisco, this time at the luxury department store Neiman Marcus, where at least 10 people stole armfuls of designer goods and then fled without anyone trying to stop them. Yes, that's an answer to the old question that if people are starving, is it acceptable for them to steal from Neiman Marcus? The footage reveals the shoplifters leaving the Union Square store, each carrying bags of stolen items with the security tags still dangling off them. The perpetrators then ran in different directions, with a few speeding away from the scene in a white sedan. One person watching says they can't do anything, perhaps referring to security at Neiman Marcus. Shoplifting cases are all too common in San Francisco, where charges of property theft less than $950 in value was downgraded from a felony to a misdemeanor in 2014, meaning that store staff and security do not pursue or stop thieves who have taken anything worth less than $1,000. I wonder how it's possible for security to know exactly what the dollar value is of an armful of designer clothing. The person who posted the video wrote a message demanding San Francisco crack down on shoplifters and called for District Attorney of San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, to be removed from office. Everyone in the city is so tired of this, so please sign the recall petition to oust Chesa Boudin now. Crime is legal, basically, and allowed and tolerated due to policies put in place and supported by all our supervisors and mayor and DA. Instagram user SF Streets 415, whose bio reads, Asian photographer and crime reporter, wrote. The petition was first launched in March to recall Boudin, who has come under fire in recent years, along with the city's leadership for allegedly not doing enough to combat San Francisco's shoplifting problem. The city's surge in such incidents arose almost immediately after the passage of Proposition 47, a ballot referendum known as the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act that downgraded the theft of property less than $950 in value from a felony charge to a misdemeanor. The monetary value of the goods stolen from Neiman Marcus is not clear, and police are still investigating the incident. According to reporting from KTVU, when officers arrived at the scene, the suspects were already gone. Witnesses told KTVU that the store was about to close when the suspects came in and smashed display cases before nabbing the goods and leaving. Larceny is the most common crime committed in the Bay Area, according to the San Francisco Police Department's crime dashboard. There are 12,194 instances in 2021. Between January 1st and June 27, 2021, the department's most recent data. This is a drop by around 11% from the same time period in 2020, when there were 13,804 instances. The next highest crime is burglary. Yes, well, you see, is it really a crime if no one reports it? What is the purpose of calling the police? When you know that they're not going to do anything. I suppose they must do that, or they probably do it for insurance reasons. The most recent retail chain to address San Francisco shoplifting problems was Target, which announced last week that 6 of its San Francisco stores will be closing at 6 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. in an effort to prevent further theft. The retailer wrote in a statement, for more than a month, we've been experiencing a significant and alarming rise in theft and security incidents at our San Francisco stores. One Target security guard, Kevin Greathouse, told Newsweek that management has instructed him and other employees not to physically engage these shoplifters. Greathouse said he carries a handgun, a taser, and pepper spray on him at all times when at Target. However, he described one alleged shoplifter recently threatening with a knife and said, I don't have any intention of getting stabbed for $60 worth of stuff. It is not clear what Neiman Marcus's security guard intervention policy is, though the department store sent a statement to the Daily Mail that reads, the safety and welfare of our associates and customers is our top priority, and we're relieved to report that no one was harmed in the incident. We're cooperating with the San Francisco Police Department in their investigation. Safari told Newsweek that the city and the district attorney's office have gotten involved in Target's case, and that many of the retail giant's alleged perpetrators are part of an organized retail crime group. These are people who are recruited, organized, and are reselling these goods, and San Francisco is hurting for it, Safari said. Small business owners can't always afford security guards and must take matters into their own hands when it comes to addressing shoplifting. Such is the case for the family-owned Daniel's Pharmacy in the Crocker Amazon neighborhood, where Ed Nazra told the Daily Mail that staff won't let shoplifters get off easily. We approached them and tried to take the stolen goods back, he said. Once they know you've got a reputation for not letting shoplifters get away, they're less likely to do it. We do get ripped off sometimes and people get away with stealing things. I'm not going to lie about that. But when we see it, we just don't let them get away. Jalal Haidari, owner of Limoncello Italian Market and Deli, recently told Fox News that his store in Tony Pacific Heights is targeted day and night. He has 32 cameras installed to catch criminals and has caught many in the act. One video reveals a thief breaking in through a window before stealing from a cash register and nabbing the electronic tablets used to take delivery orders. Another video reveals a man taking armfuls of food containers and drinks off the deli counter before fleeing. Oh, yes. Mark Zuckerberg celebrated the 4th of July in a strange way. It's always amusing when Mark Zuckerberg attempts to impersonate a human. According to Simon Kent, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg chose a hovering electric hydrofoil, the U.S. flag, and a John Denver Take Me Home Country Roads soundtrack to underline his everyday all-American boy self-regard on July the 4th. As you do. Yes. And there's a lot of fun on the internet with people putting sharks in the water to devour him. Yes, from Philip Lewis says someone told Mark Zuckerberg to act totally normal for the July the 4th. Someone called Vazabjit Banerjee commented, Mark Zuckerberg may have united the left and the right in America, just not in the way that he planned. According to the website windfoilzone.com, a complete e-foil setup can vary in price anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000, and there are currently two major brands, Lift Foils and Flightboard. The July the 4th stunt was not the first time Mark Zuckerberg has posted videos of himself. As recently as June 8th, he could be seen throwing spears at wooden targets and shooting a bow and arrow at bowling pins. The social media master of the universe inexplicably wore hearing protection to mark the occasion. Last year, Zuckerberg was spotted with sunscreen plastered all over his face while vacationing in Hawaii, which prompted internet memes to compare him from everything to mimes to the Joker. Zuckerberg later tried to explain the overdone sunscreen as an attempt to disguise himself from the omnipresent paparazzi. Let's talk now about one of my favorite subjects, which is the death of popular music. Here's a story from Roger Friedman at Show Business 411. What year is it again? Over the weekend, Queen's greatest hits went to number 1 on iTunes. Joni Mitchell's Blue is number 2. They are from 1981 and 1971, respectively. I was 16 in 1973. I'm trying to imagine music from 1923 and 1933 suddenly becoming popular, and I can't. ABBA, Journey, and Fleetwood Mac are also in the top 50, but H.E.R. Music's first album released last week is a dud, and it shouldn't be. Go figure. P.S. Creedence Clearwater Revival's greatest hits is number 14. It's been in the top 10 for weeks. So have 4 of their singles. Maybe we're in a time warp. So I hadn't heard of this person who calls herself Her, or H-E-R. Let's see. Real name, Gabriella Sabiento Wilson. So I was looking at the Wikipedia entry for this person's latest album, back of my mind, and I noticed something which I see typically in the credits. Let's see, here's a song called Closer to Me. And it is 4 minutes and 6 seconds long, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 writers. 7 writers for a song that is 4 minutes and 6 seconds long. Here is a song, I Can Have It All, featuring DJ Khaled and Bryson Tiller, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 writers and 3 producers. And it is 4 minutes and 23 seconds long. Are you getting a hint now? of why popular music is no longer popular, that apparently it is such a struggle to write a song that you need, what, a baker's dozen of people to do it. I recall some years ago, someone else talking of this phenomenon, saying that it's kind of shocking when you look at the credits for Bohemian Rhapsody, and there's one credit, Freddie Mercury. Oh, apparently back in those days, it was possible for one man to write a song. It's been a scandal in the music industry for a long time now, that when you look at the Billboard Top 200, say, it doesn't count what is called catalog records. And catalog records are those which were popular and then fell out of the charts and then came back. Because if the Billboard 200 actually listed the most popular selling records, then Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd would be there every week. And yeah, I don't, I really don't know what to make of this, except that the music industry, circa 2000, decided that it had perfected the music making process, that no chances were going to be taken anymore, that everything was done by committee. And so you just hired all the writers that work on everyone else's records, and you hire all the producers that work on everyone else's records, and you attempt to calibrate songs which are going to be bulletproof. Well, guess what? They're boring, and no one wants to hear them. It is strange what Roger Friedman said, because when I think of, I don't know, the boomer stranglehold on popular music, I remember when I was young, and it's true. The idea that music from 1923 or 1933 was going to be popular in the 1960s, well, no. Why would it be? Those were ancient times. But the music industry has ended up, well, just royally screwing itself. Because, yep, here's a record which you've got to buy because, we've spent so much money on this. This is a question I ask myself all the time. When you look at the number of people involved in making records, like Back of My Mind by H.E.R., and all of the money spent on marketing these records, do they actually make any money? Or is the music industry just another money laundering operation? Let's see. Let's look at the chat. Steve says, everyone can record and publish music now. Well, that's another problem. There is an overproduction of music. And, people have these buds in their ears, and so they're listening to music all the time. And when you do that, it just becomes boring. It becomes wallpaper. Music used to be something that was cherished. People used to look forward to, the workday ending so they could go home and, play their records. But now, everyone's listening to it all the time. Star Rover says Beatles songs would have been so much better with 10 writers and not just McCartney and Lennon. Chogokin666 says, listen to the music the machines make. Palcasso 88, assembly line songs and movies. Yes, of course, that is true of the movies as well. Let's consider movies that have been made since the year 2000. How many of them have quotable lines in them? Not very many. Again, when you look at the memes, we're going to go back to Glengarry Glen Ross again. We're going to go back to RoboCop again for our memes, that no one has made anything in the last 21 years that anyone cares to remember. Let's see. Popcasso 88 says those Beato videos where he looks at the top 10 are hilarious, tuneless, auto-tuned trash. I've seen his video on the use of auto-tuning, and I really agree with his point that auto-tuning is very useful for correcting errors. However, for some time now, producers have decided to use auto-tuning in a very distorted way in order to bend the pitch of every single line so that it becomes absolutely oppressive, so that these singers no longer sound human. Don Willis says, let's do the time warp again. It's just a step to the left. Dan, 25 producers. Dionysa says, Queen's Greatest Hits was my first CD I got from my first CD player. Let's see. Oh, for an armed rooftop Korean store owner, cloned millions, says Don Willis. Steve says, between COVID and crime, I'm not sure how some of these small businesses are still in existence, to be honest. Neither am I, actually. Star Rover says, police aren't interested to respond unless a shooting or a visible firearm is reported. And Ultravox was a great live band, says Glib Medley. I saw them play when in Vancouver, the War Memorial Gymnasium at the University of BC, about the time that their Vienna record came out. Neil Young, a great Canadian, even if politics sucks, would have been ruined by auto-tune. Well, there's a famous story about him, that he was part of this Canadian relief album record single for Ethiopia. I believe it's called Tears Are Not Enough. So he sang his line or two, and David Foster was producing. And Foster broke in on the intercom and says, that was a little flat, Neil. And Neil responded, that's kind of my style, David. Okay. So, Biden, U.S. coming back together, but COVID not yet finished. And there's a picture of Joe Biden surrounded by monstrously large plush versions of the figures on Mount Rushmore. And I don't know which is more bizarre, the fact that Joe Biden is the president of the United States or that he's posing before these figures. This is from the Associated Press. Calling a vaccination the most patriotic thing you can do, President Biden on Sunday mixed the nation's birthday party with a celebration of freedom from the worst of the pandemic. He tempered the strides against COVID-19 with a warning that the fight against the virus wasn't over. Today, all across this nation, we can say with confidence America is coming back together, Biden declared as he hosted more than 1,000 service members, first responders, and other guests at a July 4th celebration on the South lawn of the White House. For Biden, it was a long-awaited opportunity to highlight the success of the vaccination campaign he championed. The event was the largest yet of his presidency, the clearest indication yet that the U.S. had moved into a new phase of virus response. Shifting from a national emergency to a localized crisis of individual responsibility, the nation also moved from vaccinating Americans to promoting global health. This year, the 4th of July is a day of special celebration for emerging from the darkness of a year of pandemic and isolation, a year of pain, fear, and heartbreaking loss, Biden said. But of course, it is never over. This is from medicalexpress.com. Compulsory jabs, pressure grows on anti-vaxxers. A growing number of countries and territories around the world are forcing people, often in specific sectors, to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Here's a roundup. Before I get to that, I should mention that I'm quite grateful that the mask mandate in Victoria ended on July the 1st. So I no longer have to wear this filthy rag around my neck and remember to, start suffocating myself whenever I enter a store. So Tajikistan and the Vatican are among the rare countries imposing vaccinations on all adults. In the Vatican, the world's smallest state, vaccinations were made obligatory for residents and workers in February, with those refusing liable to be sacked. In Italy, several countries or territories have imposed vaccinations on certain sectors of the population. Italian doctors and health workers in the public and private sector must get vaccinated or face being banned from working directly with patients. On June the 16th, the British government announced all care home staff in England will need to be fully vaccinated. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin is against mandatory vaccinations nationwide. The mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, ordered mandatory jabs for residents of the Russian capital working in the service industry on June the 16th. Some 60% of all service industry workers in Moscow, just over 2 million people, were ordered to be fully vaccinated by August the 15th. Since then, other localities have taken similar measures, including badly hit St. Petersburg. In the United States, the city of San Francisco has announced it will require all municipal employees to be vaccinated, or they could face penalties up to and including dismissal. The new rule will not take effect until the vaccines have received full approval from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which has so far given the green light for their use on an emergency basis due to the pandemic. More than 150 employees at the Houston Methodist Hospital in Texas have already been fired or resigned after failing to comply with orders to get a shot. In France, Health Minister Olivier Véran has said that mandatory vaccinations are not yet necessary for all, but the government is working on a draft law to force health workers to be jabbed. In Saudi Arabia, Riyadh has decided that anyone using public transport or entering a government or private establishment or sports venue must be vaccinated from August the 1st. And in Pakistan, the southern Pakistani province of Balochistan on July the 1st implemented a ban on unvaccinated people entering government offices, public parks, shopping malls, and public transport. Boris, yes, what's the latest from Boris Johnson? Is he flip-flopped again? From the Associated Press, Britain plans to scrap laws requiring face masks and social distancing later this month, Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed Monday, even as he acknowledged that lifting the restrictions will drive surging coronavirus cases higher. Johnson said legal controls will be replaced by personal responsibility when the country moves to the final stage of its lockdown lifting roadmap. That's scheduled to happen July the 19th, though Johnson said a final decision would come July the 12th. Yes, so he has one more chance to flip-flop. The change will mean people can throw away masks after months of enforced face covering, though they will still be recommended in some enclosed spaces such as public transport. The removal of social distancing rules will allow nightclubs to reopen for the first time in 16 months, and people to once again order drinks at the bar in a pub. No longer will customers have to scan a phone app to provide their contact details when entering a venue. The government will also stop instructing people to work from home if they can, leaving employers free to bring back staff to offices. Britain has recorded more than 128,000 coronavirus deaths, the second highest toll in Europe after Russia, and infections are rising due to the highly transmissible Delta variant, which was first found in India. Confirmed cases have shot up from about 2,000 a day earlier this year to 25,000 a day in the past week, but the number of deaths is broadly stable at fewer than 20 a day. Johnson said Britain would have to learn to live with this virus, a major shift in tone from a leader who has previously painted COVID-19 as an enemy to be vanquished. Yes, enough with the military metaphors. And here is an essay by Harry Doherty at the excellent website conservativewoman.co.uk. For the COVID zealots, it wasn't enough for children to have 16 months subtracted from their fleeting youth. The suicides, the self-harming, the domestic abuse, the trashed educations, and stolen memories were just a warm-up. Now the mad scientists tell us your children must be jabbed with an emergency authorized vaccine for which we have no long-term data against an illness that is less deadly to them than influenza, because the absolute safety of the adult population is the most important thing in the world. On a Newsnight last week, John Edmonds of the Bill Gates-funded London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine more or less called for everyone in the country to have their lives held hostage until at least secondary school-age children were vaccinated. If we can show the vaccine is safe, and I think we are still gathering data from where vaccine has been used overseas in Israel and the US and elsewhere, I think that's going to be the way we can put this epidemic behind us and children can move on. Hold on. I thought we already knew it was safe. Did Professor Edmonds just let slip that we still have inadequate safety data on these vaccines? Public Health Commissar Debbie Sridhar, a zero COVID advocate and key advisor to the Scottish government, is more confident that the jabs are safe, or at least that's what she wants the public to think. Appearing on Good Morning Britain last Monday, she falsely reassured viewers that 0 children have died because of the vaccine and its side effects, while admitting, as if it was okay, that there have been some very rare cases of children suffering from side effects. 0 children? The CDC is currently reviewing the death of 13-year-old Jacob Clinic in Michigan, who died 3 days after his second dose of a COVID vaccine. So that's 1. Also on Monday, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson held a press conference in Milwaukee, where 6 vaccine-injured persons told their stories. Among them was Maddie DeGray, who was a healthy 12-year-old before participating in the Pfizer vaccine trials last year. For the past 5 months, Maddie has been to the ER 9 times and has been hospitalized 3 times for a total of 2 months in the hospital, Maddie's stricken mother, Stephanie, testified. The 2020 Pfizer trials involved 43,448 participants, but not a single COVID-related death was recorded in either the placebo group or the vaccinated group. The vaccine group had a severe adverse reaction rate of 0.6%, slightly higher than the 0.5% in the placebo group. Given that none of the participants in either group died of COVID-19, it's amazing that no one concluded that perhaps the illness was not quite serious enough to warrant an emergency vaccination program. Was a 95% effective vaccine really worth achieving, given the severe side effects? The esteemed microbiologist, Professor Sucharit Bhakdi, described the Pfizer trials as bullshit last February, noting, "You don't go around saying how many people got a cold in one group, so this vaccine has protected 150 people." He added, what they said in the biotech case was there were 10 severe cases in the control group and 1 severe case in the vaccinated group. You would vaccinate 20,000 people to save 9 people from severe COVID. God knows what severe meant. They were not in the ICU. What happened to Maddie DeGray is just one of the many very rare cases of children suffering from side effects in the United States. Of course, Devi Sridhar failed to mention stories like Maddie's, nor the case of the 13-year-old boy in Michigan. She also failed to mention that the CDC in America is now acknowledging a link between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and myocarditis in young men and boys. Last week, U.S. cardiologist Dr. Peter McCullough told Fox News that the CDC was being overwhelmed with vaccine side effects reports through the VAERS system. The CDC every year, with all the vaccines combined, get about 16,000 safety reports and about 25 deaths reported to the VAERS system. So far with COVID-19, they've received over 300,000 safety reports, over 6,000 deaths, nearly 20,000 hospitalizations. Meanwhile, in Israel, researchers at the Shamir Medical Center have just linked the Pfizer vaccine with thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, a rare autoimmune disease that can trigger severe blood clots, potentially blocking the flow of oxygen to the heart, brain, and kidneys. Not looking good, is it? In a civilized society, no responsible parent, doctor, or public health official would even contemplate administering a vaccine with such grim associations to people who didn't need them. An emergency vaccine would be given only to those for whom the disease presents an immediate emergency, which is not really the case even in the most vulnerable groups, as Chris Whitty himself admitted last year. So why is there such urgency to vaccinate healthy children? Apparently, the frightful Delta variant is uniquely contagious and spreading like wildfire among unvaccinated citizens who will disproportionately be children. In America, NIAID Director Tony Fauci urged parents to muzzle their unvaccinated children. That's right, gagging your children and making them feel like plague rats is what constitutes good parenting in 2021, and warned that anyone who is yet to be jabbed is at considerable risk from the variant. When you have such a low level of vaccination superimposed upon a variant that has a high degree of efficiency of spread, what you are going to see among under-vaccinated regions, be that states, cities, or counties, you're going to see these individual types of blips. It's almost like it's going to be two Americas, a chilling prophecy. But do Fauci's dire warnings of two Americas stand up to scrutiny? To find out, let's take a look at the two Britons that have been created by the beastly Delta plague. Okay, so the latest ONS figures show that overall mortality in England and Wales is at normal levels, just 0.4% above the 5-year average. There were 9,459 deaths in England and Wales in week 24, compared with 9,976 deaths in the same week last year, when there were no COVID vaccines. and 9,445 in 2019. In other words, the Delta variant is having no significant impact on mortality. Already, we can establish that the current scaremongering from Fauci, Edmonds, Sridhar, and the rest is fraudulent, as per usual. If you were prepared to surrender your bodily autonomy for a socially distanced, masked-up holiday, you can call that Malta, be their guest, but you won't be getting your life back. You have to take it back. And again, this is an essay by Harry Doherty at conservativewoman.co.uk. And here's a piece from Giles Fraser in unheard.com, who begins, I confess to being a serial blubber. Weddings, funerals, football matches, my child's first haircut. Doesn't take much for the taps to turn on. But the thing that really gets me going is singing, the very act of creating a harmonized sound with a group of people, especially when the words themselves are expressive of some deeper commitment. There is something about it that overwhelms me. Singing is often where our emotions come closest to the surface. It's a sort of spiritualized, non-carnal version of communal sex. But as with sex, we're now told that singing is dangerous because it involves the potential transmission of small droplets of spittle thrown into the air, risking communal infection. Of course, none of this stopped the 40,000 England fans at Wembley on Tuesday evening. The popular 10 German bombers might have been banned by the FA, but the fans sang it anyway. So too endless renditions of Three Lions and Sweet Caroline without even a modicum of social distancing. In church, however, the voice of praise has mostly fallen silent. Cowed by a desire to be overly compliant with every jot and tittle of government instruction, Britain's churches have come to resemble mausoleums. We're advised that our worship must become an internal matter of the heart, and that if singing is absolutely necessary, it must be conducted by a professional choir only. But churches like mine don't have the money for a professional choir, and I fail to see how the respiratory secretions of an amateur choir are any more dangerous than those of a professional one. On Tuesday evening, after the match, I quietly celebrated Mass in church without singing. While at prayer, we were being enthusiastically serenaded by the celebrations of a very different kind of communion in the pub over the road. I concede that given our church was flattened by the Luftwaffe on the first night of the Blitz, I was not at all that horrified at the thought of the RAF shooting down German bombers. No, the irritating thing about it was more visceral. Others were allowed to sing while we were being silenced. The leadership of the Church of England has been depressingly silent in defense of singing. I suspect they believe that it is more Christian to sacrifice the worship of the church for general public safety, perhaps an expression of their obsessive desire to be seen to be compliant with any and every expression of safeguarding without qualification. That is probably why the Bishop of Manchester recently suggested that the real moral failure of Matt Hancock's affair with his aide was one of non-compliance with social distancing regulations rather than ruining two marriages. Similarly, when the pandemic first started, the clergy were instructed not to go into the churches to say prayers or take services. In at least one diocese, they were threatened with the sack if they did, but encouraged to do so to make sure the building was safe for insurance purposes. Unfortunately, the general, albeit not universal, silence of our bishops gives the impression that they do not think of worship as something important enough to be vigorously defended. Perhaps this is unfair, but a little more pushback against the government would at least make people feel that their concerns were being understood. And yes, I remember an interview years ago on the Charlie Rose show where Sir James Goldsmith shocked Charlie Rose and the woman from the Chamber of Commerce when he declared that the economy exists to serve people, that people do not exist to serve the economy. So, of course, in Britain, as you know, Britons were advised to protect the NHS. The National Health Service is an organization which is given an extraordinary amount of money every year by taxpayers, and the purpose of the NHS is to protect Britons. Dan Wooten writes in the Daily Mail, "What were you thinking, Boris, by giving the entire NHS a medal? The Queen, whose own family hardly ever use it, has made this deeply flawed organization untouchable." Every Thursday at 8 p.m. in March, April, and May 2020, we collectively emerged from our home prisons onto the doorstep to bang pots and pans during the weekly clap for carers. A terrified nation was united behind protecting the NHS during what was, at the time, a genuinely unprecedented modern health emergency. In January this year, when the idea was revived, there was barely a trickle of folk who took part. The streets largely stayed silent, and the clap was forever shelved. In those 6 months, Brits were rightly waking up to the hard-to-accept reality that, as an organization, the NHS, a service for which we all personally pay for dearly through taxation, was not ready to protect us during a pandemic, however much we were exhorted to protect it. Cancer patients were having treatment denied or delayed, waiting lists for elective procedures were swelling to record levels, and for some unfathomable reason, many NHS GPs were refusing to see us face to face. The collateral damage was unprecedented, and the reverberations on our health will be felt for at least the next decade. Some experts believe it's even possible in the long term that the NHS may have caused more deaths than saved lives by discouraging non-COVID patients from visiting hospitals and doctors' surgeries during the height of the first wave. That's why I believe the decision to collectively award the NHS the George Cross today is a major folly. I should stress that this should not be taken as a slight against the individual heroes who undertake extraordinary feats on a daily basis to save our lives, but I'm certain most of those brilliant frontline staffers would rather a pay rise and proper resources than this form of gesture. Or let's identify the frontline workers who really put themselves at risk and give them a proper gong that recognizes their particular courage. However, this award is to the NHS overall, an organization so full of waste and bureaucracy that it needs to fundamentally rethink how it is run to avoid the country being shut down again for 15 months in order to protect it. It's strange to me that people are called heroes now for doing their job. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. Whether or not Freedom Day takes place on July the 19th, we won't truly return to normal until at least next year, says Chris Whitty, warning that it's going to take quite a long time to get back to normality. England's chief medical officer hinted that some curbs may have to be rolled back later this year when the NHS faces a difficult winter. But in a glimmer of hope, Professor Whitty claimed he anticipated that the UK could return to the status quo by next spring. However, he admitted that he would be surprised if British life managed to return to pre-COVID normality before then, adding it was going to take quite a long time to get back to normality. COVID hospital admissions and deaths are expected to rise in the weeks and months after July the 19th, when all social distancing measures are due to be lifted in England. Officials are also bracing for a rise in other respiratory illnesses that have been suppressed by lockdown measures during the pandemic, such as the flu. But it's hoped enough people who have been vaccinated or protected by prior infection by next spring that the coronavirus will no longer trigger a deadly surge. Can the anti-lockdown forces unite in a political coalition? This is a guest post by Jeff Cox, co-founder of the campaign group Back to Normal, calling to the various anti-lockdown political parties to form a front populaire and take on pro-lockdown candidates in elections. Back to Normal delivers easy-to-understand anti-lockdown postcards directly to households across the country. Their target is to deliver 1 million postcards, and they're currently up to 700,000. The government will treat vaccinated and unvaccinated Brits differently on the matter of self-isolation after coming into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID, with those who have had 2 doses of a vaccine not having to isolate from August the 16th. This change will also apply to children under the age of 18. A number of major airlines, including Ryanair, EasyJet, and British Airways, will continue to force passengers to wear face masks on their planes after Freedom Day. They will join businesses and other sectors which have decided to refuse custom from people who don't follow government advice after July the 19th. I suppose a lot of people have gotten used to, not flying by airplanes. And the airline companies are saying, we are going to make your experience as miserable as possible. Please buy tickets from us. Peter Hitchens tweeted on July the 6th, if people don't object to this now, their grandchildren will be wearing masks in the 2050s, although nobody will remember why. As evidence grows that vaccines do not protect against infection, the case for granting privileges to the vaccinated collapses. Yes, this news from Israel is not good. We have been assured that our unlocking will be irreversible, that July the 19th is the terminus date for COVID restrictions, in England at least. These words would be comforting if only they were matched by government action. Alas, laws allowing local authorities to bring back restrictions on businesses and social contact in case of COVID outbreaks or worse, new variants, are being kept at least until the end of September. Estimates of the prevalence of long COVID, where symptoms persist for more than 4 or more than 12 weeks after infection, depending on the exact definition, vary dramatically. Before getting to the estimates, what kind of symptoms are we talking about? All of the following have been reported: abdominal pain, cough, diarrhea, fatigue, fever, headache, loss of taste, loss of smell, myalgia, nausea or vomiting, shortages of breath, and sore throat. The ONS has documented that almost 14% who test positive for COVID-19 continue to report at least one symptom 12 weeks later. And to wrap up this subject, I'm now going to go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed, as usual. And let's see, this is the Daily Caller. Joe Biden says we need to go community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, and oftentimes door to door, literally knocking on doors to get people vaccinated. Berenson comments, yeah, so what does this mean? Will the stormtroopers, friendly public health professionals, have individual household level data on who has been vaccinated? I'd ask Uncle Joe, but he's busy ordering ice cream. And as promised, I'm going to return to Hilaire Belloc's The Serval State, originally published in 1912. And this is a book about slavery and how it is the natural institution of humanity. And Belloc predicted that it was coming back in Britain. He writes, the mass of men in the capitalist state is proletarian. As a matter of definition, the actual number of the proletariat and the proportion that number bears to the total number of families in the state may vary, but must be sufficient to determine the general character of the state before we can call that state capitalist. But as we have seen, the capitalist state is not a stable and therefore not a permanent condition of society. It has proved ephemeral, and upon that very account, the proletariat in any capitalist state retains to a greater or less degree some memories of a state of society in which its ancestors were possessors of property and economically free. The strength of this memory or tradition is the first element we have to bear in mind in our problem when we examine how far a particular proletariat, such as the English proletariat today, is ready to accept the servile state, which would condemn it to a perpetual loss of property and of all the free habit which property engenders. Next, be it noted that under conditions of freedom, the capitalist class may be entered by the more cunning or the more fortunate of the proletariat class. Recruitment of the kind was originally sufficiently common in the first development of capitalism to be a standing feature in society and to impress the imagination of the general. Such recruitment is still possible. The proportion which it bears to the whole proletariat, the chance which each member of the proletariat may think he has of escaping from his proletarian condition in a particular phase of capitalism, such is ours today, is the second factor in the problem. The third factor, and by far the greatest of all, is the appetite of the dispossessed for that security and sufficiency of which capitalism, with its essential condition of freedom, has deprived them. Now let us consider the interplay of these three factors in the English proletariat as we actually know it at this moment. That proletariat is certainly the great mass of the state. It covers about 19/20ths of the population, if we exclude Ireland, where, as I shall point out in my concluding pages, the reaction against capitalism, and therefore against its development towards a servile state, is already successful. As to the first factor, it has changed very rapidly within the memory of men now living. The traditional rights of property are still strong in the minds of the English poor. All the moral connotations of that right are familiar to them. They are familiar with the conception of theft as a wrong. They are tenacious of any scraps of property which they may acquire. They could all explain what is meant by ownership, by legacy, by exchange, and by gift, and even by contract. There is not one but could put himself in the position mentally of an owner. But the actual experience of ownership and the effect which that experience has upon character and upon one's view of the state is a very different matter. Within the memory of people still living, a sufficient number of Englishmen were owning, as small freeholders, small masters, etc., to give to the institution of property coupled with freedom a very vivid effect upon the popular mind. More than this, there was a living tradition proceeding from the lips of men who could still bear living testimony to the relics of a better state of things. I have myself spoken, when I was a boy, to old laborers in the neighborhood of Oxford who had risked their skins in armed protest against the enclosure of certain commons, and who had, of course, suffered imprisonment by a wealthy judge as the reward of their courage. And I have myself spoken in Lancashire to old men who could retrace for me, either from their personal experience of the last phases of small ownership in the textile trade, or from what their fathers had told them, the conditions of a time when small and well-divided ownership in cottage looms was actually common. All this has passed. The last chapter of his passage has been singularly rapid. Roughly speaking, it is the generation brought up under the Education Acts of the last 40 years which has grown up definitely and hopelessly proletarian. The present instinct, use, and meaning of property is lost to it, and this has had two very powerful effects, each strongly inclining our modern wage earners to ignore the old barriers which lay between a condition of servitude and a condition of freedom. The first effect is this, that property is no longer what they seek, nor what they think obtainable for themselves. The second effect is they regard the possessors of property as a class apart, whom they always must ultimately obey, often envy, and sometimes hate, whose moral right to so singular a position most of them would hesitate to concede, and many of them would now strongly deny, but whose position they at any rate accept as a known and permanent social fact, the origins of which they have forgotten and the foundations of which they believe to be immemorial. To sum up, the attitude of the proletariat in England today, the attitude of the overwhelming majority, that is of English families, towards property and towards that freedom which is alone obtainable through property, is no longer an attitude of experience or of expectation. They think of themselves as wage earners. To increase the weekly stipend of the wage earner is an object which they vividly appreciate and pursue. To make him cease to be a wage earner is an object that would seem to them entirely outside the realities of life. What of the second factor, the gambling chance which the capitalist system, with its necessary condition of freedom, of the legal power to bargain fully and so forth, permits to the proletarian of escaping from his proletariat surroundings? Of this gambling chance and the effect that it has had on men's minds, we may say that, while it has not disappeared, it has very greatly lost in force during the last 40 years. One often meets men who tell one, whether they are speaking in defense of or against the capitalist system, that it still blinds the proletarian to any common consciousness of class, because the proletarian still has the example before him of members of his class, whom he has known, rising, usually by various forms of villainy, to the position of capitalist. But when one goes down among the working men themselves, one discovers that the hope of such a change in the mind of any individual worker is now exceedingly remote. Millions of men in great groups of industry, notably in the transport industry and the mines, have quite given up such an expectation. Tiny as the chance ever was, exaggerated as the hopes in a lottery always are, that tiny chance has fallen in the general opinion of the workers to be negligible, and that hope which a lottery breeds is extinguished. The proletariat now regards himself as definitely proletarian, nor destined within human likelihood to be anything but proletarian. And I will have more from the servile state tomorrow. Did you know that Joe Biden likes ice cream? Boy, he sure loves ice cream, doesn't he? And the media just can't get enough of pictures and video of Joe Biden eating ice cream. Because the idea that an American would love ice cream is obviously such a fantastic one that, yes, let's just see more pictures of Joe Biden eating ice cream. Jim Kunstler writes, a nation mesmerized by its own weakness blandly celebrated the long ago and faraway memory of standing up for itself, while it passively endures the current orgy of tyrannical cancellation and suppression of anyone talking back to the present folks in charge. Over just a few years, this tyranny has grown like a toxic slime mold from such an unlikely place, the internet's social app ecology of Facebook, Twitter, and Google, as they took over the public arena, where the battle of ideas is supposed to live, and did the government's dirty work, complete with adorable emojis. You're fired. Who will stand up to Zuck, Jack, and Sundar Pichai? Who elected these megalomaniacs boss of the USA? What will it take to end their reign of terror? Some sort of revolution? Shh. That must be a dirty word, even considering we just celebrated the high point of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, signed July the 4th, 1776. Don't look to Joe Biden, the nation's putatively elected leader, but whose election back in November 2020 you're liable to hear more about as the summer stickily unspools. Zuck, Jack, and Sundar managed to protect Joe Biden from the stupendous depredations of his offspring, Hunter Biden, recorded in explosive detail on a laptop the public was not allowed to hear about. Don't look to the Department of Justice, supposedly investigating that horde of memos and emails detailing the Biden's influence peddling to the CCP and others. They're busily surveilling white supremacists on the apps run by Zuck, Jack, and Sundar. And for sure, don't look to the news media, that coalition of sellouts and quislings busy decoding the foreign policy moves signified in Joe Biden's ice cream flavor choices. Rocky Road means, oh, let China have that. Wondering who is actually running the Joe Biden government? Jim Kunstler asked. Some of us out here are. Do you think we're allowed to say that? For instance, have you tried Googling the name Susan Rice lately? Remember her? Maybe not. Joe Biden appointed her director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. From the look of things across the country, you think her plate would be heaped mighty high, what with insurrection and other white mischief threatening to take down the republic. Anyway, I Googled news for her. Hardly a gosh darn thing came up that wasn't from months ago, and most of that was sheer puffery about how accomplished she is and what a fabulous person. Don't you wonder what her phone log looks like? All those calls to the Obama residence day after day, hour after hour. All of which raises the question, is the USA just floating merrily down the stream of events under the beneficent reign of Joe Biden, Susan Rice, Barack Obama, and company, or are we rather free-falling? I expect it is the latter, and toward what? It being mid-year, I will venture a few guesses. Enjoy the summer while you can, because coronavirus is coming back in the fall, and watch out for people who are vaccinated getting sicker than the unvaxxed. That will be a mind bender, as if Americans were not all utterly perplexed and bewildered by one political swindle after another. The whining will drown out even the news of more white supremacy, but they told us. And on a wave of COVID-19, one variant or another would take out whatever remains of the service economy, the restaurants struggling just now to return to normality, the hair salons, the gyms, the florists, booksellers, sports, theaters, live music venues, what have you. Since we no longer have much of a manufacturing economy, the only thing left would be Wall Street, which was originally designed to raise money for the manufacturing and service sector, but now only raises money for itself via the seemingly magical mingling of leverage with liquidity to conjure profit from black holes where the ghosts of productivity howl. It's some trick, but let's face it, it's still just a trick. Also in that picture is the weird three-legged race of deflation tied to inflation running both uphill and downhill at the same time, like a nightmare out of M.C. Escher. The USA will be toting up a $3 trillion plus deficit just for the current fiscal year. At the same time, the debt becomes ever more obviously unpayable. How does debt even mean anything if there is no prospect of paying it back, especially in the form of financial instruments, namely bonds? And how does a financial system based on debt behave when all that is the case? I guess we're going to find out. Kunstler concludes, my guess would be a price collapse in financial instruments, abstract things represented by money, and then a collapse of money itself. You may be thinking, not a pretty picture. I know. And we thought the last days of the Soviet Union were bad in 1990. Hoo boy, are we in for a rough ride. We can hardly imagine the social side effects of all that, but it would seem to imply people having a rather hard time finding something to eat or getting anything else they need. Remember good old Ross Perot talking about a giant sucking sound? Think of that against a background of things on fire. What flavor ice cream will Joe Biden be ordering on Halloween? Yeah, I wonder how long we're going to have ice cream for. Here's a story from Bob Woods at CNBC. As consumers become increasingly comfortable eating faux meat burgers that look, cook, and taste like the real thing, a food tech startup backed by Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates is using fungus as the primary ingredient to create alt meat foods. Nature's Find, which for some reason is spelled FYND, based in Chicago, has raised $158 million in funding from investors, including Bezos, Gates, and Al Gore. The company's meatless breakfast patties and dairy-free cream cheese are scheduled to hit grocers' shelves later this year, with other meatless products, including burgers, chickenless nuggets, and yogurt in development. The alternative foods sector skyrocketed in 2020, growing U.S. retail sales 27%. And bringing the total market value to $7 billion. Meanwhile, shipments of alt protein products from food service distributors to commercial restaurants rose 60% year over year in April, according to research firm NPD Group. The ascendant industry is headlined by Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, whose alt meat burgers, chicken, and sausage products have disrupted the $733 billion U.S. food manufacturing industry. This has prompted Tyson Foods, Purdue, Hormel, Cargill, and other traditional meat producers to launch their own products in the category. Another story about artificial food. It's almost as if the regime media is telling us that you're not going to have real food anymore. You don't deserve to have real food. Let them eat fungus. And, oh yes, astroturfing. Let's talk about astroturfing. I'm reminded, I don't know whether this organization is still around. It's called the Non-Smokers' Rights League, something like that. And where does the Non-Smokers' Rights League get its money from? The government of Canada. So the Non-Smokers' Rights League puts out reports saying that Canadians want more restrictions on people smoking. And the government points to this report, which they effectively pay for, and say, see, our policies are correct. This is from Connor Fitzgerald, who has his own Substack at fitzfromdublin.substack.com. NGOs are suddenly everywhere and suddenly more influential than they used to be. How did we get here? How does their interaction with the system work, and why are they such a useful tool for people in charge? In this piece, I'm going to discuss that with a particular reference to the Irish situation, where NGOs have grown so overbearing that it sometimes seems we're perfecting a new approach to governing with them at the center. There are a number of definitions out there of NGOs, which I summarize as a nonprofit entity, free of government influence, but not government funding, whose goal is to promote social or political change. To preempt the true observations that NGOs do good and essential work, and that the line between charities and NGOs is vague, I propose the following clarifying continuum. An organization, charity, NGO, whatever, that works to house the homeless is really good. An organization that works to advocate for the homeless is maybe okay, depending on what advocacy means. An organization that takes a big bag of government money to advocate for the homeless by lobbying the government to relax immigration enforcement or introduce hate speech laws is really, really bad. The last one is really what I mean by NGO, an organization paid substantially from the public purse to press for social and cultural change that may not be in anyone's interests other than their own, and which is, in any case, often ludicrously distant from their core mission. The practical function of this type of NGO is a process I call consensus laundering. This means is using the mechanisms of government, the press, and NGOs to reach a predetermined outcome with a veneer of democracy, so as to present changes to culture and society as driven from the bottom up rather than the top down. The government wants to do something. It pays NGOs to advocate this cause. The work of the NGOs is treated by government as being representative of the demands of civic society and the will of the people, which must be legislated for this urgent need to be met. The media assists by treating advocacy of NGOs as newsworthy, creditable, and representative of an unmet democratic demand. The activities of NGOs, government, and media act as a self-fulfilling cycle. The more money NGOs get, the stronger their advocacy. The more positive and relentless the press coverage, the more government will feel empowered to increase funding and legislative activity in the relevant area. They're just beginning to be used, but I suspect in Ireland a key final stage of this process will be citizens' assemblies. Such assemblies have become a politically fashionable idea around the world for exactly the reasons described above. They provide the ideal way of integrating the laundered consensus back into the system as law. People who work in media and politics, and indeed NGOs, will often proselytize for citizens' assemblies, which is understandable, as the assemblies will only ever propose the sort of change they agree with. This is not about whether any individual decision of a citizens' assembly in Ireland or elsewhere has been wrong, but the way in which partisan NGOs are funded by governments and their work amplified and legitimized by the media means that such assemblies are incapable of proposing something that people want, but the government doesn't. It can be hard to articulate the extent to which NGOs have penetrated Irish life, the way they cast a shadow over the entirety of the civic world, and the way they have become the sole source of authority on hot-button cultural issues like immigration and hate speech. Gerard Murphy provides some great insight into the way the resources of government-affiliated NGOs and charities were marshaled in support of laws suppressing freedom of expression in 2019. This is a microcosm of what happens in Irish political life every day. In writing about the explosion of NGOs, Angela Nagle recently noted that they are a symptom of elite overproduction, and their existence is primarily about expanding and maintaining the power of the class of people that staff them. She quotes an author who refers to an ever-expanding supply of credentialed professionals rather than a greater demand for their service, leading to the creation of auxiliary vehicles for maintaining their wealth and status. Well, I think this is substantially true. I think, as with many other critiques from the left, it underrates the extent to which people who staff NGOs want that work because of a sincere impulse to do good, which in many cases is fulfilled. Of course, it's easier to undertake moral work when it also provides a high standard of living and an increase in social status. The fact that NGOs really do good and important work, which would in many cases be undone, is a key factor in their usefulness in steering change. The moral factor is key in the public perception as well. The decline of the church left unfulfilled need for a source of moral guidance in Irish life, preferably one which played upon existing Irish good feeling towards charities. Ask an Irish person of a certain age about Biafran children and trocar boxes, and it's easy to understand the default good feeling toward any charitable seeming enterprise. Someone pointed out to me recently that trocar box is almost the exact opposite of a modern NGO, and that it is bottom-up rather than top-down phenomenon. Nevertheless, these are the neutral pathways which NGOs work. Ireland has a technocratic and managerial political culture, even more so than elsewhere. Irish political leaders are happy to leave the thinking to more important people and to simply administer the resulting settlement like regional branch managers of a big corporation. This provides the additional benefit of allowing them to pass off blame when something goes wrong, or when the management of a given situation presents too many political no-win scenarios. Although not NGO related, COVID and the government's relationship with health advisors has been a great illustration of this. The rise of NGOs have created a way for the regional managers to apply this strategy to cultural and moral matters, as well as practical ones. In Peter Mayer's essential book, Ruling the Void, he describes how party democracy has collapsed over time as a large amount of decision-making authority has been outsourced to neutral and expert bodies beyond the reach of voters. Parties then vie to be administrators of the status quo rather than representatives. To use Mayer's phrase, the zone of public engagement is being evacuated as decisions are moved from the direct reach of the people's clumsy hands or those interested in acting for them. What NGOcracy means is that the powers that be have found a more morally satisfying way to do elite-oriented managerial liberalism. NGOcracy and consensus laundering solve two problems with what Mayer describes. One, that distancing people from the decision-making process looks and feels bad for everyone. And two, that the technicians of the system want to apply the expert outsourcing approach to moral problems. How should we inculcate children with anti-racism? How should we have hate speech laws? As much as practical issues, how high should tax rates be? NGOs are sources of moral authority paid by the government to tell the government what it already thinks under the guise of representing national civic life. These views are then laundered into law. As with many other things, this is happening everywhere, but it's worse in Ireland. We're the laboratory of democracy, and not in a good way. And again, this is an essay called On Ngocracy by Connor Fitzgerald at his Substack at fitzfromdublin.substack.com. I've decided that I'm going to do Music Monday tomorrow. I'm going to talk about Serge Gainsbourg then. Let's take a look at the chat. Don Willis says, I made a belt out of old wristwatches. It did not hold up my pants. Okay. Don't you mean enjoy the fungus? Adds Laponius Maximus Meridius. I don't know. First bugs, now fungus. I mean, you must have seen this in movies and TV shows. That someone's in prison or someone has crash landed in an airplane and this person is starving, and there comes that sickening moment when he lifts up a rock and decides to eat the bugs because that's what he's been reduced to. But now we're supposed to be proud of eating the bugs. Hello to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Thank you for your service. He didn't want fungus among us, said Chogokin 666. The non in NGO is a joke, says Steve. Chogokin 666, is there a single NGO that isn't an intelligence agency conduit? I mentioned one of these NGOs earlier in the broadcast, that this happens to me all the time, that I read some news report and it says so-and-so of some agency that you've never heard of recommends that this be done. And then I look up that organization that no one has heard of and found out that they are a very big deal indeed, that they have all these employees who are apparently living wonderful lives, telling the rest of us what we must do. And they are exceedingly influential because, again, as the article says, they tell government to do what it's already decided that it is going to do. Birkin Sultanov says, having mushroom pizza later. And what do we have coming up now? Oh, the gays in Canada are very unhappy because so-called conversion therapy hasn't yet been banned. Yes, that we're not going to throw, psychologists or members of the ministry into prison for speaking to a 12-year-old girl who decides that she's actually a boy. Yeah, they're actually going to make this a criminal offense in my country. But the Commons is off. Parliament is on vacation now. But since apparently this is the most important thing in my country, according to the Canadian press, leaders of the various groups in the Senate are discussing a government request to recall the chamber after senators face criticism for recessing for the summer without passing a bill that would effectively ban the practice of conversion therapy. The decision to recall the Senate will ultimately be in the hands of Speaker George Fury, who could announce a recall as soon as this week. With a potential federal election on the horizon, Liberals are blaming Conservative MPs and senators for the fact that the bill is not yet law. However, the Conservatives say that it is the Liberals who are playing cynical political games and using the alphabet people community as political pawns. Yes, the Conservative Party has decided that it has to get to the left of the Liberal Party on the question of alphabet people and their endless demands. And let's see. Here's a piece from Abraham Miller at the American Thinker. He begins, there is a growing anger in America. You won't see it on PBS or in the mainstream media. You won't hear it at college orientations. But patriotic America is angry. It is angry at athletes who represent America and then denigrate our national symbols. It is angry at those who justify such despicable behavior by saying everyone has a right to protest. Yes, but if you represent America, perhaps you should have the good sense not to spit on your country. It is angry at elites who exported our jobs to China, borrow money from the communists, and then extend them foreign aid. It is angry at being told all whites are racists. It is angry at having a 6-year-old first-grade white child being told she is responsible for all the evil in the world. It only has to look at former colonies and ask, what has anti-colonialism wrought? Is Hong Kong better off under China than the British? It is angry that January 6th will be investigated, but the street thuggery of BLM and Antifa is immunized from any scrutiny. It is angry about the violence in the inner city that now spreads to solid middle-class neighborhoods. Patriotic America is the America of traditionalism, of church-going believers, of people who serve in the military and the police, of people who are blue-collar workers and lower middle-class workers. It is primarily white, but not exclusively so. It is more likely to be rural than urban. It is eschewed by the Obamas of the world, who see it as clinging to its religion and its guns. It clings to both, with both pride and conviction. It is angry about people who become millionaires by selling socialism to the overeducated and misinformed. It awaits mobilization. It sits on the social periphery, abandoned by elites. It awaits a leader. It gets riper each day for mobilization. It will have its day, either in the arena of politics or in the streets, but it will not be denied. It yearns for a leader, a messianic presence that will lead it to a new millennium. It seeks a savior for the America that currently exists, is seen as destined for perdition. It is angry at ideologies posing as intellectual theories that are inoculated from being rejected, like so-called critical race theory, which, like Marxism, fascism, is an ideology, not a theory. Theories are subject to refutation. Critical race theory is not. It is angry at bringing into this country some immigrants who not only do not share our values, but also seek to destroy us. Unlike elites in the media, when it learns of a random knife attack on innocent people where the perpetrator yells Allahu Akbar, it doesn't need days to discern the motivation. The elites who do so are laughingstocks who undermine their own legitimacy. The pursuit of the millennium is part of the human instinct, especially when people feel that their leaders have isolated, denigrated, and abandoned them. When jobs are exported, when elite universities gloat over changing admission standards and admitting a disproportionate number of non-whites, they are inadvertently sending a message that further marginalizes whites who do not share these values. Donald Trump was the incarnation of this anger. He came on the political scene and won the presidency to the shock and beliefs of the political elite class. Yet they never comprehended why he won. They still refuse to see the consequences of their embrace of a politically correct ideology that alienates hundreds of millions of Americans. We are perhaps more divided than we have been since the Civil War, and there's no one on the political stage, in the mass media, or in the institutions of so-called higher education that will bring us together. And Miller concludes, the political deplorables will be tired of being stigmatized. They will grow tired of seeing their children harassed for the color of their skin, and they will do what all such people have done since time immemorial. They will embrace a political savior who will lead them to a new millennium. And Abraham Miller is an emeritus professor of political science, University of Cincinnati, and a distinguished fellow with the Chaim Solomon Center. And you can find his essay at AmericanThinker.com. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. Sorry for missing yesterday, but I will be back tomorrow, and we're going to do Music Monday then. And I am going to be talking about the genius as pervert, Serge Gainsbourg. That's funny. He was named Lucien, and he was named Lucien Ginsburg. So, he had to wear a yellow star in Paris during the 1940s. So, I understand him changing his name from Ginsburg to Gainsbourg, but Lucien, I guess people called him Lulu, and I guess he decided that was not, he didn't want that anymore. So he chose Serge, sound exotic and Russian. And coming up on the show later in the week, on a Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Sean Baker's 2017 film, The Florida Project. And on the Book Club Friday, I am going to be discussing Edward J. Epstein's The Annals of Unsolved Crime. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations can be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.